The Arizona plains in 1875 stretched like a vast, untamed wilderness of brittle grass and sun-bleached earth, a desolate expanse near Dustwind Crossing where the dry wind kicked up dust clouds that stung the eyes and never ceased, its ceaseless murmur weaving tales of survival, loss, and resilience amid the prairie frontier. Dustwind Crossing, a remote schoolhouse perched on the edge of this harsh terrain, stood weathered under a dusty sky still clinging to the afternoon's heat, its wooden walls peeling under years of sun, its barren yard whispering of a solitude long endured by its solitary teacher. Gideon Black rode slowly toward the schoolhouse, his horse straining beneath his towering 6'5" frame, each hoofstep leaving a deep imprint in the cracked earth, the weight of a long day's cattle drive pressing on his 45-year-old shoulders. His face, rugged with a broad jaw and a mane of dark hair streaked with gray, was framed by a wide-brimmed hat, his massive hands gripping the reins with the strength of a man who'd wrestled steers and storms. His chest bore the grief of burying his parents a decade past beneath a lone oak that leaned toward the dry creek like a broken giant. Since then, he had lived a solitary life, not by choice but necessity, his ranch bearing the shape of their memory, a faded quilt still draped over a chair, a shelf of tools gathering rust, the hearth cold without their laughter. The town whispered of the giant cowboy who spoke little, some calling him hardened by loss, others saying he'd always been that way. He'd been out since dawn, driving a herd through the blistering heat to sell at the nearest trading post, the dust caking his boots and the solitude of the prairie, a refuge from a world that had taken everything. As he neared the schoolhouse, a faint sound broke the stillness, not the rustle of wind or the call of a hawk, but a child's cry, faint and desperate, cutting through the dust. His head snapped up, scanning the horizon, squinting against the glare. Movement caught his eye, a woman standing in the schoolyard, holding a small boy, her form shadowed by the fading light, her posture weary yet resolute. Instinct surged through him, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. Without thought, he spurred his horse forward, the animal's hooves pounding the earth as he dismounted with a heavy thud, his rifle in hand. The woman was Clara Evans, the schoolteacher he'd seen from afar, her faded dress clinging to her slender frame, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face etched with lines of loneliness and strain. The boy, Ethan, no more than 2, clung to her, his small face buried in her shoulder, his whimpers filling the air. "Help us," she said, her voice breaking, her hands trembling as she shielded the child. Gideon's gaze softened, but before he could respond, he noticed the glint of steel in the distance outlaw scouts, their silhouettes barely visible against the horizon. He said nothing, his massive frame towering over her as he assessed the threat, his jaw tightening. Clara's eyes, wide with fear, met his, and she stepped closer, her voice low. "I need a wife, and you need strong sons," he declared suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the tension, his words bold and unexpected. She froze, her breath catching, the weight of his proposal sinking into her chest like a sudden storm. His intent was clear, a pragmatic alliance to protect her and the child, yet it carried an undertone of something deeper, a longing he'd buried beneath his silence. Clara blinked, her mind racing. Why would this giant offer such a deal? Who was pursuing them? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions, until she nodded faintly, her grip on Ethan tightening. I'll consider it," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. He later learned her name fully, her past a mystery tied to the outlaw's interest, and the child's fragile health, a burden she'd carried alone. He led them to the schoolhouse, its door creaking as he pushed it open, the interior dim and dusty, the desks scattered with papers, the hearth cold and empty. Inside, he laid them on a cot, covering them with his coat and a tattered blanket, then stood guard, his rifle ready. Kneeling by the cold hearth, he struck a match, his hand still trembling from the encounter, the flame catching slowly on the dry wood. Once it took, he stood and met their gazes. They watched him, silently, their eyes a mix of gratitude and wariness. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and even, breaking his usual silence. Clara nodded faintly, and he pulled a chair to the far corner, sitting to guard them through the night, his jaw tight with the uncertainty of what he'd proposed. The storm outside raged, its thunder a backdrop to the quiet within. By dawn, the fire crackled steadily, its orange glow brushing the cot where Clara and Ethan lay. Their breathing steadied, color returning to their faces. Levi hadn't slept, remaining in the chair, his damp shirt and aching back a testament to the night's tension. Ethan stirred, his small hand reaching for Clara, who held him close, her strength returning with each breath. Clara eased upright, her body aching from the strain, her eyes meeting his watchful, cautious, but not hostile. "You understand me?" he asked quietly. A pause, then a nod. "You hurt anywhere?" Another pause, and she touched her arm, wincing, then gestured to Ethan, who whimpered softly. Levi crouched beside them, rewrapping her arm with a clean cloth, his hands gentle, her dignity unshaken despite her vulnerability. "Names?" he asked after a long moment. "Clara," she whispered, nodding toward the child. "Ethan, my son." He tapped his chest. "Gideon." They surveyed the schoolhouse wooden walls, scattered desks, the rifle near the door, their gazes lingering on it. "Safe here," he said, following their looks. "No one's coming." It was a hope, not a certainty, for a teacher and child like them, pursued by outlaws, likely carrying a past that might follow. He stepped outside to tend his horse, needing space to process, the smoke rising steadily from the chimney a sign of life within. Inside, Clara eased upright, her body aching from the journey, the silence striking her as unfamiliar yet comforting. Gideon's coat smelled of leather and sage, and she pulled it closer, studying the chair where he'd watched over them and Ethan. When Gideon returned with water and dried meat, he found her sitting up, smoothing her dress, its torn sleeve still exposing her arm. He handed her the provisions and she ate slowly, feeding Ethan, her eyes steady. "Where's your family?" he asked carefully. Clara looked away, her jaw tensing, shaking her head firmly. "Lost," she said softly. "Outlaws?" Another pause, then a nod, her voice trembling. Though he sensed withheld truth, he let it rest. For the rest of the day, they communicated in glances and gestures, him clearing space by the fire, her tending to Ethan with quiet care. Gideon repaired a broken window, his mind on her proposal and the mystery of their past, while Clara kept the fire alive, claiming a role with silent purpose. That night, she stayed near the hearth until he climbed into a corner bedroll, then settled close with Ethan, their warmth and the child's soft breaths a new presence in his solitude. Neither spoke, but the silence had shifted, a bond forming in the wake of his bold offer, the weight of her past lingering like a shadow. The Arizona plains unfurled like a relentless expanse of brittle grass and fading shadows as Gideon Black, Clara Evans, Ethan, and the Apache kin ventured away from Dustwind Crossing, the pale dawn casting long, ghostly silhouettes across the prairie terrain. Gideon led the way on foot, his towering 6'5" frame cutting a commanding figure, his weathered coat dusted with prairie dust, his boots crunching through the dry earth, his lasso coiled at his hip, his rifle slung across his back. His face, rugged with a broad jaw, bore a mixture of determination and unease, his dark eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the outlaws, a quiet resolve battling the weight of his past solitude. Clara walked beside him, her faded dress mended with rough stitches, her dark hair loosened from its bun, her wrists still tender from recent strain, her gentle eyes reflecting a mix of hope and fear. Ethan, the 2-year-old boy, clung to Clara, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of recovery from the night's distress. A young Apache warrior, Tala, trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his hands carrying a spear, his presence a silent guardian, flanked by 2 others from his tribe, their faces painted with earth tones, their horses laden with supplies glinting in the weak light. The journey to a hidden refuge near Broken Ridge, a 2-day trek, was their goal, but the prairie held other trials to test their fragile alliance. Their water was scarce, the canteen they'd salvaged from Dustwind Crossing reduced to a few tepid drops, their supplies dwindled to a strip of jerky and a handful of dried berries Tala had foraged. The heat bit deep, its intensity a relentless adversary, the silence broken only by the rasp of their breathing, the soft whimper of Ethan, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Gideon's mind churned with the previous night's bold proposal, his impulsive offer to Clara, her hesitant acceptance, the arrival of Tala with his claim of tribal protection, the threat of outlaws. He'd acted to ease his own loneliness, but their presence now drew danger, a price he hadn't foreseen. He offered Clara water, a gesture of goodwill, his massive hand trembling slightly from the heat. Clara accepted, her eyes narrowing. "Why offer this for us?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Gideon met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Lost my folks to drought. Need a family. You need protection." Clara's expression softened, but suspicion lingered, a reflection of a life shaped by isolation and fear. Tala and the warriors walked with a quiet dignity, their buckskin garments rustling softly, the woven pouch Clara carried given by Tala catching the fading light. Tala shared their story as they moved, his voice low and resonant. Outlaws hunt her, stole her peace, threatened her child. She fled with Ethan to survive. "We've tracked them since, fearing their return," Clara added, her tone firm. "My husband's gone. They want me silent." "A warrior," Kono muttered. "They seek her secrets." Gideon's heart sank. The pouch likely held something valuable, a lure that had ruined lives, but Clara's safety and Ethan's life were worth more. "I'll keep you safe," he said, his resolve firming, though doubt gnawed at him about her past. Their progress halted at midday when they reached a trading post tucked into a shallow gully. Prairie Haven, a haven for outlaws and wanderers. Gideon needed supplies, his stores depleted after Clara and Ethan's rescue, but Clara tensed. "Danger here," she warned. "Men talk." Gideon nodded, his rifle ready. Inside, the air was stifling, the stench of sweat and stale tobacco thick. A trader named Silas Kane, a wiry man with a sly grin, leaned against a crate, his eyes narrowing. "Gideon Black," he said. "Heard you took a teacher and her kid. Outlaws are offering a bounty." Gideon's jaw tightened, his past with Prairie rumors flashing. "Mind your own, Silas," Kane smirked, his gaze on the pouch. $200 says I tell them where you're headed." Clara's pouch flashed, striking Kane's arm, forcing him back. "Speak, and you'll regret it," she hissed, her voice trembling with defiance. Gideon stepped forward, his rifle aimed. "Walk away, Silas. This ain't your fight." Kane paled, retreating, his laughter echoing. "They'll hunt you down." Gideon cursed under his breath. Kane's treachery would lead the outlaws straight to Broken Ridge. "We move now," he said. The tribe's respect grew, their trust a tentative thread. "You're brave," Kono said. Gideon shook his head, the weight of his past pressing down. "I've been alone too long." The ambush came at dusk. Hoofbeats thundered through the grass, and 4 outlaws led by a scar-faced rider named Rex surrounded them near a rocky outcrop. "Hand over the woman, Black," Rex barked, his rifle raised. Gideon fired, his shot grazing Rex's arm, sending him staggering. Clara threw a rock, striking another's shoulder, while Tala's spear felled a third. Gideon's second shot dropped a rider, the outcrop falling silent save for the wind's moan. The 4th fled, shouting threats. "They'll burn you out." They took cover behind the rocks, bandaging minor cuts, the heat seeping into their exhaustion. Tala's eyes met Gideon's, his suspicion easing. "You fight for us," he said. Gideon wiped dust from his brow, his jaw tightening. "Ain't right, what they did. I've got regrets of my own." Clara nodded, her pain surfacing. "They killed my husband for this pouch's secret." Gideon's breath caught. The relic was the key, a prize worth killing for. "We'll keep it safe," he said, his resolve hardening. Their bond deepened as they rested, Gideon sharing his canteen, Tala offering berries from his pouch. "What's in that pouch?" he asked. Clara held it up, its symbols glowing faintly. "It holds records of their crimes. They want me silent." Gideon's heart ached, his losses echoing hers. "I lost my folks to drought, lived alone since." Kono's gaze softened. "We're all broken then. Maybe we heal together." The night stretched ahead, the prairie vast, but the threat of the outlaws grew. Gideon taught Clara to use his lasso, her hands steady despite her past, their partnership a lifeline. Tala showed him Apache prairie signs, their trust aflame against the prairie's grip. "You're strong," Gideon said. Clara smiled, a rare light in her eyes. "You too, partner." The tribe watched, their kinship deepening, a family forged in the crucible of the prairie, but the peace was fleeting. Hoofbeats returned closer now, Rex and his men, relentless as the heat. Gideon chose a defensible ridge, setting up with the tribe behind rocks. "We fight if we must," he said, his rifle ready. Tala nodded, his spear poised. Rex's men appeared, their rifles glinting. "Last chance, Black," Rex shouted. Gideon fired, his shot dropping a rider, but an arrow grazed Tala's leg, drawing a cry. Clara shielded him, her pouch a talisman, while Kono's spear felled too, forcing the attackers to retreat. They bandaged Tala's leg, Gideon's hands gentle. "You're all my family now," he said. Tala's eyes met his, a warmth breaking through. "And you're ours." The prairie tested them, its dusty trials forging a bond, but the outlaws' wrath loomed larger, a storm they'd faced together. Broken Ridge was near, but so was their reckoning. The Arizona plains stretched like an unforgiving ocean of brittle grass and rolling dunes, their surface baking under the relentless glare of a midday sun that churned the air into a shimmering haze of dust and heat, the horizon wavering with mirages of desperation. Gideon Black, Clara Evans, Ethan, and the Apache kin led by Tala pressed onward, the wagon creaking behind Gideon's steady hands, the weary horse plodding through the dry earth with a labored gait, its breath a faint gasp in the stifling air. Gideon's towering 6'5" frame loomed over the group, his weathered coat clinging to his broad shoulders with sweat, his boots sinking into the cracked soil, his lasso coiled at his hip, his rifle slung across his back. His face, rugged with a broad jaw, bore a determined set, his dark eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the outlaws, a quiet resolve battling the weight of his past solitude. Clara walked beside him, her mended dress fluttering beneath a borrowed shawl, her wrists still tender, her gentle eyes reflecting a mix of hope and fear. Ethan, the 2-year-old boy, clung to Clara, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of recovery from the night's distress. Tala trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his hands carrying a spear, his presence a silent guardian, flanked by 2 Apache warriors, their faces painted with earth tones, their horses laden with supplies glinting in the weak light. The hidden refuge near Broken Ridge, their destination, was a day's journey, but the prairie held other trials to forge their resilience. Their water was nearly gone. The canteen they'd salvaged from Prairie Haven, reduced to a few tepid drops. Their supplies dwindled to a strip of jerky and a handful of dried berries Tala had foraged. The heat beat down, its intensity a relentless adversary, the silence broken only by the rasp of their breathing, the soft whimper of Ethan, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Gideon's mind wrestled with his past, his parents lost to drought, his years of isolation, a guilt that shadowed his every step. The presence of Clara and Ethan, a mirror to his loneliness, stirred a compassion he'd buried, their resilience a challenge to his despair. "We need to find water soon," Gideon said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Tala nodded, pointing to a faint depression on the prairie floor. "There's a dry wash ahead. It might hold a spring," he replied, his Apache wisdom guiding them through the wilderness. The tribe's silence, broken only by soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of supplies, hinted at their vigilance. The pouch Clara carried a burden they shared. They reached the dry wash as the sun peaked, its cracked earth a fleeting mercy against the scorching heat. Gideon checked the wagon, its wheels wobbling from the rough terrain, while Clara and a warrior named Kono scouted for signs of life, her movements aided by a makeshift crutch. The wash offered a shallow pool, its water brackish but drinkable, a rare oasis in the prairie's grip. Gideon filled the canteen, offering it to Kono first, his massive hands trembling from the heat. "Drink, friend," he said, the word warm with care. Kono accepted, his eyes softening. "Thank you, Gideon," he murmured, a rare nod breaking through his stoic demeanor. The moment was brief, but it deepened their bond, a thread of trust weaving through their shared struggle. The prairie's ordeal struck at noon. A dust storm brewed on the horizon, a roiling wall of red dust that swallowed the sky, its roar a test of their endurance. "Get down," Gideon shouted, pulling Clara, Ethan, and the wagon behind a dune, the warriors and horse crowding in. The storm hit like a living entity, its force tearing at their clothes, dust clogging their throats and stinging their eyes. Gideon shielded Ethan with his body, Clara and Tala huddling close, the tempest raging for hours, leaving them buried in drifts, their water spilled into the sand. As it passed, the prairie revealed a new peril, an outlaw trap, a snare concealed by dust, its metal jaws glinting near Clara's crutch. Gideon reacted instantly, yanking her back, the trap snapping shut inches from her. Tala's quick thinking with his spear dislodged the mechanism, saving them. Good save, Gideon said, his respect for them growing. Clara nodded, her gaze steady. The Prairie tests our resolve, she replied. That night they camped in the wash's lee, a small fire their only warmth, its glow casting shadows on the sandy walls. The storm had delayed them, the refuge still a day away, and Gideon's mind churned with guilt, his family's loss, his years of isolation. Now this family's fight. Tala offered him a berry, his hands gentle. You fight for us, he said. Why? Gideon poked the fire, his face shadowed. I turned away from help once my folks paid for it. Can't do that again. Ethan's eyes, though weak, softened, his small voice whispering, Papa, a word that pierced Gideon's heart. The confession hung heavy, a mirror to Gideon's regrets. Strength ain't just in surviving, he said. It's in standing together. Clara leaned against him, her voice small. This pouch holds evidence of their crimes. They want me silenced. Gideon's heart ached, his losses echoing hers. I lost my folks to drought. Lived alone since. Kono's gaze met his, a warmth breaking through. We're all lost then. Maybe we find kin. Their talk was interrupted by a rustle. Apache figures emerged from the dusk, led by a stout woman with a painted face. I am Mara, Tala's sister, she said, her voice cautious. We saw the storm. Outlaws hunt you. She offered a water skin, her eyes on Clara and Ethan. You're safe now, sister. Clara ran to her, tears in her eyes. Gideon saved us. Mara nodded, offering Gideon a feathered cord. You're kin now, Cowboy. The reunion was brief but heartfelt. Mara's warriors, 12 strong, joined them, their spears glinting. The tracker, Rex, is near, Mara warned. He plans an attack at dawn. Gideon's heart steadied, his bond with the tribe a shield. We'll be ready, he said. Ethan's hand found his trust a beacon. Father, he murmured. The word warmed Gideon, a redemption he hadn't sought. The peace shattered as the first light crept over the horizon. Hoofbeats echoed Rex and 12 riders, their rifles ready, their intent clear in the pre-dawn gloom. Mara's men melted into the sand dunes, leaving Gideon and the tribe exposed on the ridge. Hold, Mara whispered. But Gideon stood firm, his rifle raised, the weight of the warning settling in. Rex's voice cut through the heat. Give up the woman, Black, or die. Gideon fired, his shot grazing a rider, but an arrow struck Mara's arm, drawing a cry. Clara shielded her, her pouch a talisman, while Tala's spear felled too, forcing Rex to retreat momentarily. They bandaged Mara's arm, Gideon's hands gentle. You're all my family now, he said. Mara's eyes met his, a warmth breaking through. And you're ours. The Prairie tested them, its dusty trials forging a bond, but the outlaws' attack loomed larger, a storm they'd faced together. Broken Ridge was near, but so was their reckoning. Broken Ridge rose like a parched scar across the Arizona plains, its treacherous pass of cracked earth and weathered outcrops standing defiant against the encroaching dusk. The sun dipped low, casting a fiery glow across the ridge's rim, the air thick with the scent of sun-scorched grass, and the faint promise of a cooling night breeze following the day's relentless heat. Gideon Black, Clara Evans, Ethan, and the Apache kin, led by Tala, prepared for their stand, the tension palpable in the stillness, heightened by the looming threat of the outlaws' attack. Gideon's towering 6'5" frame loomed over the group, his weathered coat torn at the sleeve, his boots caked with dust and blood from his grazed arm, his lasso and rifle poised despite the ache in his muscles. His face, rugged with a broad jaw, bore a grim determination, his dark eyes shadowed by the weight of his past solitude. Clara stood beside him, her mended dress fluttering beneath a borrowed shawl, her arm wound, bandaged, her gentle eyes resolute with survival. Ethan, the 2-year-old boy, clung to Clara, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face showing signs of courage. Tala trailed them, his buckskin attire adorned with faded beads, his leg wound bandaged, his hands wielding a spear, his presence a steady guardian, flanked by 2 Apache warriors, their faces painted with earth tones, their weapons and horses poised for battle. The journey to this refuge had forged their bond, now tested by the outlaws' relentless pursuit. The ridge offered strategic ground, steep slopes for ambushes, rocky outcrops for cover, and a narrow pass for traps. Gideon fortified a vantage point with Tala's men, his massive hands calloused from years of ranching, now skilled in war. Clara rigged tripwires with sinew, her movements precise despite her exhaustion, her pouch a constant reminder of their burden. The warriors assisted, stacking stones with Kono, their vigilance unwavering. "The outlaws want the pouch," Tala said, his voice low and strained. "They'll kill us for it." Gideon nodded, his guilt over past isolation fueling his resolve. "We hold them here," he replied. Kono handed him a sharpened stake, a silent pledge of unity, the weapon's weight a comfort in his hands. Mara distributed spears and arrows, her warriors blending into the ridge's shadows, their movements silent and deadly. "Rex leads them," she warned. "The attack is imminent." Gideon's heart steadied, his bond with the tribe a shield against the encroaching dark. "We fight as family," he said. Ethan's small hand found his, a flicker of trust breaking through his fear. "Father," he murmured, a word that warmed Gideon's soul. The sentiment lingered, a redemption he hadn't dared hope for. As the wind carried the distant sound of approaching hooves, the conflict, now a reality. As dusk deepened, the air grew taut with anticipation, the ridge's silence broken by the crunch of boots on gravel. The outlaws rode in with 15 men, Rex at their side, the tracker's scar-faced grin a harbinger of violence. Their leader, a broad man in a black duster lined with stolen pelts, dismounted and called out, his voice a thunderclap against the plains. "Black, hand over the woman and that pouch, or this ridge becomes your grave." Gideon stepped forward, his rifle raised, his voice firm despite the heat. "You'll have to take them over my dead body," he shouted, his breath visible in the cooling air. The clash erupted like a prairie tempest. The outlaws charged, their rifles and revolvers spitting fire through the dusk. Gideon's first shot dropped a rider, the bullet finding its mark with a precision honed by survival. Tala's warriors struck from the shadows, their spears felling 2 more, their movements silent and deadly. Clara triggered a tripwire, a dynamite cache salvaged from an old trader's stash exploding and sending a shower of dust and rock, scattering the attackers. But the outlaws' numbers were overwhelming, and Rex's rifle was a relentless predator, his bullet grazing Gideon's shoulder, drawing a sharp hiss of pain. Mara pulled him behind a rock, her arm wound, seeping anew. "Stay alive," she growled, loosing an arrow that struck a man's chest, her aim unwavering despite her fatigue. The ridge became a battlefield, its echoes ringing with gunfire and the thud of falling bodies. Gideon fired again, dropping another rider, the heat numbing his hands but not his resolve. Tala's warriors fought with primal fury, their spears piercing the fray, while Kono and the warriors lobbed rocks, their forms a surprising force against the rugged terrain. But the outlaw leader's voice cut through the chaos. "Clara, give me the pouch's secret, or they all die." He held a pistol to Tala's head, the warrior's spear shattered, his eyes defiant. Clara's heart sank, her pouch clutched tight. "No," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. Gideon's mind raced, he couldn't lose another family. He signaled Tala's men to hold, his gaze locking with Clara's, ATD, a silent plea for a plan. Clara stepped forward, her stance defiant despite her wounds. "They blackmailed my family," she shouted, her voice carrying over the wind. "They killed my husband, forced me to hide their crimes." The revelation hit Gideon like a thunderclap. The outlaws' greed wasn't just for the pouch, but to silence Clara, who knew of their blackmail, a dark secret her past held. The leader laughed, his pistol steady. "Then you all die with your defiance." But Clara moved, shoving Gideon, Ethan and Rose aside as Rex fired, the bullet tearing through her chest. She fell, blood staining the dust, her pouch slipping from her grasp. "Gideon, no!" he roared, lunging to Clara's side, his massive hands trembling as he pressed against the wound. Tala's warriors charged, their spears a blur, felling 3 men in a surge of vengeance. Kono struck with a rock, stunning a rider, while Mara's arrow found another's leg. Gideon tackled Rex, their struggle a tangle of fists and sand, until his lasso coiled around the tracker's neck, ending the threat. The outlaw leader roared, charging with his pistol, but Tala's spear pierced his side, bringing him down. The remaining outlaws fled, their horses vanishing into the dusk. Gideon knelt beside Clara, his hands stained with her blood, his heart breaking as he tried to stem the flow. "Hold on," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Her eyes met his, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "You're my husband now," she rasped. "Protect him. The pouch is our future." Her hand fell, her spirit slipping into the Prairie's embrace, her sacrifice a final act of trust. Mara bound the leader, her men finishing the fight, the ridge falling silent save for the wind's mournful wail. The outlaws were defeated, their men scattered, but Clara's loss was a wound deeper than the heat. Gideon cradled her, tears mixing with the dust on his face, the weight of her words sinking in. Ethan, Tala, and the warriors approached, placing the pouch, a woven mat, and herbs on her chest. "She was my mother," Ethan said, his small voice thick. "Now she's with our ancestors." The Apache carried her to a pyre, their chants rising, a tribute to her courage that echoed through the ridge. Gideon stood, his guilt eased by her acceptance, his promise to protect Ethan and the others a new purpose. The ridge smoldered, the air heavy with loss and victory. Mara offered Gideon a place with the tribe, and he nodded. "I'll honor her at the refuge," he said, his voice steady. The journey to Broken Ridge had broken the outlaw's grip, but Clara's sacrifice would resonate in the prairie's silence. Gideon's redemption was hers, and the pouch her people's future would remain guarded. The dawn broke over Broken Ridge, a fragile light spilling across the windswept plains, where the embers of Clara's pyre glowed like the last whispers of a fading hope. The air was thick with the lingering scent of smoke and the dry, earthy aroma of the prairie, the vast Arizona landscape reclaiming the battlefield with a quiet, unyielding peace. Gideon Black stood at the ridge's edge, his weathered coat torn and dusted with ash, his boots planted firmly in the cracked earth, his lasso and rifle resting against a boulder. His towering 6'5" frame seemed diminished by grief. His face, rugged with a broad jaw, bore the weight of loss, his dark eyes glistening with unshed tears, the guilt of his past solitude softened by Clara's final words. The woven pouch with the tribal secrets, Clara's strange reward, hung around his neck on a cord, a symbol of the union that had brought him to this moment. The outlaw leader, bound and defeated, slumped against a rock, his claim to power shattered, his greed no match for the courage of a cowboy and his adopted tribe. Ethan, the 2-year-old boy, clung to Gideon's leg, his tattered blanket pressed against his chest, his pale face reflecting a mix of sorrow and newfound strength. Tala, Mara, Kono, and the Apache warriors gathered nearby, their painted faces mirroring the resilience of the prairie. The Apache warriors, led by Tala, moved with a solemn reverence, their faces reflecting the ridge's rugged hues as they gathered around Clara's pyre. The flames had dwindled to a gentle glow, the earth around it darkened by melted wax and ash, a testament to her sacrifice. Tala knelt, offering a prayer in Apache, his voice a deep chant that reverberated through the plains, honoring a mother who had transcended her role as protector and wife. Gideon watched, his massive hands trembling as he placed Clara's shawl once her shield onto the pyre, a silent vow to carry her legacy forward. Ethan, Mara, and the warriors joined him, adding the pouch, a woven mat, and a bundle of herbs, their offerings a tribute to her courage. "She saved us," Ethan said, his small voice thick with emotion. "You kept her promise." Gideon nodded, the words a balm to his wounded soul, a redemption he hadn't dared to claim. The journey to the hidden tribal valley began, the warriors carrying the pyre's remnants through the ridge's dusty trail, its ashes a sacred burden. The path was treacherous, the ground shifting underfoot, the heat of the day giving way to a cooling breeze that carried the promise of renewal. Gideon walked with them, his arm aching from the graze but his spirit lifted by their unity. The valley emerged a sheltered expanse nestled between rolling hills, its floor dotted with wildflowers and a faint shimmer of a spring fed by an underground stream. The Apache survivors greeted them, their faces etched with grief for Clara but warmth for her savior. Mara led Gideon to the spring, its waters clear and life-giving, reflecting the cavern walls adorned with painted symbols and woven mats, a sanctuary Clara had died to protect. "Her spirit guards this place," Mara said. "You are kin." The tribe gathered around a fire that night, the valley's walls amplifying their voices as they shared tales of Clara's bravery. Her gifts to Gideon, her trust, the pouch were now symbols of their union, their weight heavier than the secrets they held. They offered him a place among them, their eyes reflecting gratitude and hope. "You fought for her," Kono said, handing him a woven mat. "Stay, and find peace." Gideon hesitated, his mind drifting to his past, a cowboy broken by drought and loss. His parents' deaths, a guilt he'd carried like a boulder. Clara's words, "You're my husband now," echoed, her sacrifice a key to unlock that prison. "I'll stay," he said finally, "but I'll bring my strength to your valley, with your help." The days that followed were a blend of mourning and rebuilding. The Apache taught Gideon their ways, how to channel the spring's water for crops, how to weave mats from prairie grasses, how to honor their rights with herbs by the fire. Ethan became his shadow, the boy's small hands learning alongside Gideon's, his laughter a rare sound that softened the edges of his grief. Ayla, guided by Tala, took to organizing the valley's defenses, her resilience turning into leadership. They constructed a sturdy adobe home near the spring, its walls rising under their hands, a fusion of Apache wisdom and Gideon's ranching skills. The prairie, once a place of solitude, became a bridge between worlds, its silence broken by the tribe's songs and the trickle of water, a stark contrast to the hollow quiet he'd known. One evening as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple, Gideon stood at the spring's edge, the woven pouch a constant reminder. Ethan and the tribal children joined him, holding a new pouch and a carved lasso crafted by the tribe. "For us?" Ethan asked. Gideon nodded, his eyes misting as he handed them out. "Your ma would want you to have them," he said. Ethan smiled, a rare light in his young face. "She gave us a home." The sentiment lingered, a bond forged in the crucible of the prairie, strengthened by the promise of a family legacy. The tribe celebrated with a feast, their songs filling the valley, Clara's name woven into the melodies. Gideon learned her story in full, how she'd fled her husband's murder to protect Ethan, how she'd hidden the pouch to preserve evidence of the outlaw's crimes, how her spirit now watched over them. His past, his failure to save his parents, his years of isolation faded against her acceptance. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore, but a husband and father to those he'd once failed. Mara approached, offering a carved wooden flute. "Lead with her strength," she said. Gideon took it, his hand steady. "I will." Weeks later, the valley thrived, its spring nourishing new crops, its people strengthened by Gideon's aid. The tribe, true to their bond, began the journey back to Dustwind Crossing, bringing materials and hands to rebuild Gideon's ranch, transforming the ruins into a symbol of renewal. He rebuilt his life, the tribe's help a lifeline, their stories a balm to his loneliness. Clara's shawl hung above the new home's door, a shrine to her sacrifice, its fabric a silent witness. The prairie stretched vast, its sun-scorched plains a testament to their fight, but it was no longer a place of solitude. Gideon's redemption was complete, not in land, but in the family he'd found: Ethan, Tala, Mara, Kono, the tribe all bound by Clara's legacy. As the sun rose over Broken Ridge, its golden light bathed the valley and the distant silhouette of the reborn ranch, a promise of a new beginning. Gideon stood at the home's threshold, the wooden flute at his side, the woven pouch gleaming. He was no longer just a giant cowboy who'd made a bold proposal, but a father to a boy whose mother's courage had saved him, whose pouch had turned a desperate union into a legacy of hope. The prairie whispered her name, and Gideon carried it forward, a family legacy born from the ashes of sacrifice, with the promise of a rebuilt home anchoring their new union.